James Thurber, 1894 to 1961, a modern humorist and illustrator, by Christy Maynard, English 180. Author background. James Thurber was born on December 8, 1894 in Columbus, Ohio. When he was young, he was playing William Tell and lost sight in his left eye after an arrow pierced it. His father was a civil clerk, his mother was eccentric, and the subject of many of his short stories. He attended Ohio State University from 1913 to 1917. He was not allowed to graduate as he was unable to complete an ROTC course due to his eye injury. He did receive an honorary degree at a later time. He married Althea Adams and had a daughter, Rosemary, in 1931. They soon divorced in 1935. The same year he married Helen Wismer, who became his business manager and editor, as well as his wife. They moved to Connecticut, but ended up moving back to New York. Thurber died in 1961 from pneumonia complications and is buried in Columbus. Thurber's career. Thurber worked at the American Embassy after college, then returned to Columbus to work as a reporter for the Columbus Dispatch. He wrote skits for the OSU theater groups in the evenings, where he met his wife. He and his wife moved to Paris in 1925, where he worked at the Chicago Tribune, Paris edition. When they returned to New York in 1926, Thurber worked for the New York Evening Post, then the New Yorker, where his cartoons were featured, and they made the cover 6 times. His first book was Is Sex Necessary, co-authored by E.B. White, who was the author of Charlotte's Web. He wrote a play in 1940, The Male Animal, which became a Broadway hit and later became a movie in 1942 starring Henry Fonda. He was known as a modern humorist, a cartoonist, writer of children's fantasy, fiction, and short stories. Here's some quotes from James Thurber. The dog has seldom been successful in pulling up to its level of sagacity, but man has frequently dragged the dog down to his. I do not have a psychiatrist, and I do not want one, for the simple reason that if he listened to me long enough, he might become disturbed. Humor is emotional chaos remembered in tranquility. Historical background. 1894, Thurber was born. The First Korean War begins. In 1903, Wright brothers invent the first airplane. 1914, World War I begins. 1920, women were granted the right to vote in the United States. Prohibition begins. First commercial broadcast, and League of Nations was established. In 1929, stock market crashes. Great Depression begins. In 1930, Worldwide Depression begins. In 1932, World War II begins. In 1948, NATO forms. Cold War begins. U.S. contains spread of communism. In 1949, abstract expressionism breaks out in New York City. In 1960, Civil Rights Movement. In 1961, Thurber dies. Works, awards, and honors. Cartoon covers for the New Yorker magazine. Reporter for the Columbus Dispatch and Chicago Tribune. Won a Tony for his Broadway play, A Thurber Carnival, which he starred in and played himself sometimes. His book, My World and Welcome to It, was developed into a TV series in 1969. And the actor, the star of the show, William Wyndham, won Best Actor at the Emmys in 1970. And the show received Best Comedy Series. The Secret Life of Walter Mitty was made into a movie in 2013. He wrote 40 books, several short stories, plays, and skits. Some of his works include The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, The 13 Clocks, My Life in Hard Times, Many Moons, The Wonderful O, and The Last Flower. Thurber rented a house in Columbus when he attended Ohio State. at 77 Jefferson Avenue, and it's now called the Thurber House, which became a museum in 1984 and is open for tours. Story background: The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. First published in 1939, the story displays Thurber's humor and imagination. A repetitious sound of pocketa pocketa throughout the story fascinates Walter Mitty, the main character. The reader can see into his imagination, but not into Mrs. Mitty's, but can observe that she thinks there is something wrong with him when she says she will take his temperature when they get home. She is also very controlling, symbolized by the car telling him to slow down, to buy overshoes, to put his gloves on, and to have the snow chains removed from his tires. The story is set in Waterbury, Connecticut on Main Street in Walter Mitty's car, but the main events are in his mind, daydreaming in between his wife barking commands to him. In 5 different daydreams, Walter becomes the hero. Daydream 1, he is Commander Mitty, the pilot of a Navy hydroplane. Number 2 fantasy he is Dr. Mitty, one of the world's most eminent surgeons. He uses a fountain pen to repair a malfunctioning machine and saves the day again. A suspect in a murder case. He's on the witness stand answering the district attorney's questions. He is an expert marksman, but his arm was in a sling on the night in question. He ends up punching the DA over a woman. Number 4 fantasy, Captain Mitty again, World War I pilot this time. He pours himself and the sergeant a brandy only to throw it down to go brave gunfire and flamethrowers. And the 5th fantasy 7, he is a defiant prisoner about to be executed. And this is the end of the story. When he tosses a cigarette, flicks it to the side as he faces the firing squad. And this could mean he's giving up his bad habits of daydreaming and smoking. And that's the end of the presentation. Thank you.